Hi, I'm Mike Coates. I've been a volunteer at the Old Lowlight Heritage Centre since it opened 6 years ago, where I've given various talks. My next talk was to be about Sir James Knott, but can't presently happen, so meanwhile, here's a shortened version. Every seaman entering or leaving the Tyne has seen the Knott's flats towering over the river. But just who was James Knott? James was born in Howden in 1855. His father Matthew, a grocer and ship's chandler, a year later moved the family to North Shields, where his father was a well-known, highly respected wine and spirit merchant in Nile Street. James came from a fairly humble background, and one wonders what special attributes he possessed that made him so successful in business. The eldest of 10 children, he was educated at the school attached to the Scotch Church in Howard Street. He left at the age of 14 to start work as a shipping clerk on Newcastle quayside. Aged 23, he married Margaret Annie Garbutt, the daughter of a Wesleyan minister, and they went on to have 3 sons, Thomas, James and Henry. When first married, they lived at 6 Frank Place. At this time, he realised ship owning offered more opportunities, so with borrowed money, he launched his own business, purchasing his first ship, a collier brig called the Pearl of Scarborough, for £186, which carried coal from the Tyne to northern France. His next ship, another brig, Rival, was wrecked a month later, and he wasn't much luckier with his third ship, which lasted no more than 6 months. Not discouraged, by 1881 he had done well enough in business to order from Swan Hunters his first steamship, the Saxon Prince, intended principally for coal and the Spanish ore trade. This was the first of the later world-famous Prince shipping line, managed from an office in Milburn House, Newcastle. He had vision and was quick to see the possibilities of changing technical developments in the shipping industry, particularly the value of steam. The Prince Steam Shipping Company Limited was formed in 1883 with the white Prince of Wales feathers, the company crest, painted on the funnels. By 1886, the fleet comprised of 20 sailing ships and 17 ocean-going steamships. A year later, the sailing vessels were sold, and he applied himself to the development of a fleet of steamships engaged in worldwide trade. In 1887, Charles Parsons, after experimenting with a steam turbine engine in the Turbinia, purchased the Eastern Prince from James to develop the engine further. They were associates, and James took over as president of the Institute of Marine Engineers from Charles Parsons, a great honour for a ship owner. After James moved to Close House, they became neighbours, as Charles Parsons also lived in Wylam. By 1888, the company was firmly established on routes from Europe and New York to Brazil, and before the First World War, carried 1/3 of the total coffee crop from Brazil to New York and New Orleans. With the opening of the Manchester Ship Canal in 1894, a service was instituted between Manchester and Alexandria for the importation of Egyptian cotton. The Prince Line became the 3rd largest privately owned shipping line in the world, with 45 ships, many of them built in Tyne and Wear shipyards, primarily by Short Brothers. As older ships were replaced by new and larger tonnage, a regular line was built on the carriage of Italian emigrants to New York, with a regular fortnightly service between New York and the Mediterranean, and services from New York to South Africa, India and the Far East. James expected the same commitment from his ship's officers to hard work as he possessed, and all the ships carried a warning inscribed on their bridges: all accidents are the result of carelessness. During the First World War, 21 of the 45 steamers were lost through enemy action. The Portuguese Prince, normally engaged on the North to South America service carrying coffee from Brazil to New York, 3 months into the war was converted to carry 1,200 horses on a regular run from New York into Brest, France, to aid the war effort. The Knott family lost 2 sons who were serving officers in France during the First World War. Captain Henry Basil Knott, aged just 24, and Major James Knott was killed in 1916, aged 32, on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. Despite being killed almost a year apart and buried 70 miles from each other, the brothers were eventually reunited and buried side by side in the Reservoir Cemetery at Ypres, which is unusual, as tradition dictated that British servicemen were buried where they died. James must have exerted considerable pressure to enable this to happen. After their deaths, James donated the bell tower of St George's Memorial Church in Ypres. By the beginning of the 20th century, James's businesses had grown considerably, and the family lived in various houses in Newcastle, including the Manor house at Jasmine. On the census return of 1891, along with the family members, are listed 9 servants, including a French tutor. They later had a companion housekeeper and a lady's maid for Mrs. Knott. They were certainly moving up in the world. Another house they acquired about this time was on Beverley Terrace, Cullercoats, called Monk's Haven. But by 1906 they moved to Close House, 𝗁𝗲, with an estate covering an area of over 600 acres, far away now from the humble terrace streets of James' childhood. James had been devastated by the deaths of his sons, both directors in the family shipping company, meaning he had no heirs to pass his company on to, and this may have been the reason he decided to sell the Prince line to Furness Withy & Company at the end of 1916 for £3 million, and to establish and endow the Knott Memorial Trust, initially to help the widows of men killed in battle. His eldest son, Thomas, may not have wanted an administrative career and was an adventurous wanderer who, aged 20, departed to South Africa and fought there in the Boer War. By 1902 he was in America. By 1913 he was in Australia, and when war broke out in 1914 he was in New Zealand and enlisted and was sent to Gallipoli. After news of his brother's deaths reached him, he was given 2 months' compassionate leave to return to England. For a private soldier to be given such leave was unheard of, and it may be again his father pulled strings to facilitate it. In 1918, James bought much property in Heddon village, presumably with funds from the sale of his shipping empire. But in 1924, he sold 32 lots of this property, about half of the village, including farms, rows of houses, and even the 3 Tons Inn. It's been suggested that he wanted St Andrew's Church in the village renamed after his sons, and could not get his way on this matter, hence his selling. He did, however, have installed elaborate stained glass windows in memory of his sons in the village church, and paid to have the memorial park created. Within the garden is the war memorial. So then in 1926, money was donated instead for the building of St James and St Basil Church, Church Hall and Vicarage in Fenham. Apart from shipping, he had many other business interests, including purchasing the Togston Colliery and forming the Acklington Coal Company, and had an interest in an anthracite mine. Always keen to improve himself, he studied law, became a barrister, but only practiced for about 4 years before returning to his first love, shipping. He was also a JP for Northumberland, was a keen gardener, and enjoyed sea fishing and coble racing off the northeast coast. And in later years he enjoyed sailing around the Mediterranean. James Knott has been described as a strong, genial, vigorous, enthusiastic and courageous man, always keen to take advantage of changing technical advances in shipping and business. He was noted to have a retentive memory and to be very observant. He was a director of the Newcastle Protection and Indemnity Association. He was a regular attender at church and an ardent conservative and unionist and a keen tariff reformer, being one of the founders of the Northern Tariff Reform Federation. This was a protectionist British pressure group formed in 1903 to protest against what they considered to be unfair foreign imports to protect British industry from foreign competition. He was elected in 1910 as Conservative MP for Sunderland, but retired after only a few months in office to focus on his businesses. In 1914, he held a commission in the Royal Naval Reserve, but was never called up as his position in the shipping industry was considered so important to the war effort. In the birthday honours list of 1917, in recognition of his life's work, he was made a baronet and became Sir James Knott. His coat of arms bore the words, "Deeds, not words." After selling his shipping business, he challenged his energy into his many interests, including renovating the house and gardens at Close House and spending his summers at the appropriately named Wylam Lodge in Torquay. Rowland Lishman, a North Shields businessman, was headhunted by Sir James and became a lifelong friend and business confidant, and was also made executive trustee of the Knott Memorial Trust. Rowland, after hearing about the terrible housing conditions in the town, helped establish the 𝘁𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗀 Trust, providing affordable homes for rent. He discussed with St James what kind of legacy St James should leave, and because of his interest in social housing, the development of Knott's flats was agreed as a lasting memorial. And after his death, the trustees provided funds to build the Knott Memorial Flats and nursery school. During the Napoleonic Wars, the site of Knott's Flats had been barracks for up to 1,000 troops. After the war, it ceased to be barracks, was renamed Percy Square, and was let as workmen's cottages. In the 1930s, the Sir James Knott Housing Trust approached Tynemouth Council with plans to build 140 flats on the cliff top, resulting in the square being demolished. The tenants selected were families who had connection with the sea, already living in North Shields in derelict properties scheduled for slum clearance. In 1938, the flats were nearing completion and boasted the biggest clock in the northeast. In 1924, Sir James Knott purchased 𝗬𝗲𝗵𝗵𝗁 Manor on the Isle of Jersey and retired there. 𝗬𝗲𝗵𝗵𝗁's Investments Company was formed to further his philanthropic interests. He took a keen interest in the local breed of Jersey cattle, and some of his herd was successfully exhibited at the Royal Jersey Show. He also spent his leisure time in yachting, and in 1924 he had a 200-foot motor yacht, aptly named the Princess, built on the Tees. It had the facility to carry his car, probably his Rolls-Royce, in her hold. In 1929, Lady Margaret died at the age of 74 on this yacht, when it was in Cairns. Lady Margaret, in her own right, was also involved in many charitable ventures. Sir James remarried in 1932 at Monte Carlo to Miss Elizabeth Gauntlet, the 25-year-old daughter of Colonel Gauntlet, but he died just 2 years later, aged 79. His funeral was held in St Clement Church, Jersey, with memorial services held the same day at St Andrew's Parish Church in Hedden and the Church of St James and St Basil in Fenham. The crew of his yacht, Princess, lined the pathway to the church, and his coffin was carried on the shoulders of 6 of the crew. His death was widely reported in the press throughout Britain. Sir Thomas Knott, on his father's death, inherited his father's title of 2nd Baronet and £1 million. And in 1936 he had built in the village of Hedden the Knott Memorial Hall in memory of his parents. James left the bulk of his £340 million estate, that's in today's money, to form the St James Knott Trust Fund to help improve the conditions of people living and working in the northeast of England. The trust gave land and money towards the building of the James Knott Youth Centre in North Shields, which was completed in 1938 and still provides services to the local residents. Sir James Knott's philanthropy is of continuing importance to the North East. Since 1990, the Trust has made over 8,500 grants totalling over £27.8 million, including orphanages, museums, hospitals, universities, and providing a lifeboat at Cullercoats. The Trust also funds the College Valley estates, including Chillingham Park, where the Chillingham herd of wild cattle are kept. In 2019, the Sir James Knott Trust made £1.8 million worth of grants and managed assets worth over £50 million. It continues to make charitable grants, a remarkable legacy for this North Shields gentleman, whose wealth achieved by his entrepreneurial ventures continues to benefit and improve the lives of so many people in so many different ways throughout our region. An amazing legacy, I think you must agree.